Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. So today is Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of the Jewish month of Shvat, which, as I spoke about last week, is a sort of minor Jewish holiday. And depending on what your community you're in, it's either a big deal or it's very obscure and it's just kind of a thing to mark on the calendar and maybe a slight change in your prayers. And it's different for everybody. And what's beautiful about it is it can be given new meaning every generation. So while that's not the topic today, I just wanted to note that. But the topic today is really something quite beautiful and unique. So the Parsha of Beshalach, we are now in, really the greatest moment, really in the history of our people in many ways. We have finished the saga of Yosef, and now we're reaching the highest point of the saga with Moshe. The plagues have happened. Paro has sort of let us go at this point. We're finally leaving Mitzrayim. Paro changes his mind where our backs are to the Egyptians, our fronts are to the Sea of Reeds, the Yam Suf, and then Hashem does, any movie that tells this story, this is the most powerful moment. If you're gonna have a soundtrack, you save the best song for this moment when the water just splits in two and the Israelites march through it with God surrounding them with his miraculous, literally his miracles. It's absolutely incredible. And there's nothing to do but literally thank God for what has happened. And as the people cross to the other side of the Sea of Reeds, that is what happens. Moshe, who is right now the de facto, more than de facto, is the leader of the people, he begins to sing. And in fact, the prayer that he sings, the song that he sings, he begins, Az Yashir Moshe, and we sing this every day in the Siddur. Az Yashir Moshe uvanei Israel, and it's both Moshe and all of the children, the people of Israel singing. And it's unique also that it says Yashir, which is future. He will sing, not in the past. The rabbis pick up on this because it's noting that we will continue to have things that we are grateful to God for. But as soon as this poetic, rich song ends, then, which is, according to the rabbis, sung by the men, then it's the women's turn. Now, it's very common, or fairly common, in both ancient literature and in the Torah, after a great battle or a great victory, to sing a song of praise for God. The Book of Tehillim, in many ways, is a bunch of songs praising God. But what's unique is both in this Parsha, and the name of this Shabbat is called Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of the song, because it includes in this Parsha the song that Moshe sang, but it has a special haftorah. And the haftorah is from the book of Judges. And most of the judges, as was typical back then, were men. However, one of them was Dvorah, who was a woman. And in the song that she sings, which is this week's haftorah, she sings about not only the victory over some of the Canaanites, but it's a song about a woman's victory, Dvorah, and Yael, who with Sisera and everything. So it's about two women and a great victory they accomplished. And while that should be more common, it still was quite rare in ancient times. And so too, what happens in this moment where Moshe's sister Miriam starts to sing is also rather unique. And the rabbis pick up on that in a number of ways, including the fact that before this song, we didn't know her name. When the famous story of Moshe being taken down the river and her sister helping her, it didn't say her name. We just found out her name this week, which is very peculiar. And what we're going to see right now is just the language of this text, which is so beautiful. And she's leading, Moshe led the men in song. And of course, there was a separation of men and women and mechitza even back then. Miriam's going to lead the women in song. So Gloria and Leonard, I'm going to unmute you, but before they read the first text, are there any questions on what I've discussed so far? Excellent. So Gloria, if you would take this text, so again, this is right after Moshe has sang the song celebrating God's many miracles all the way up to and including the passing through the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf. Please.
Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he hurled into the sea." Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on into the wilderness of Shur, and they traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water.
So as with all lines in the Torah, even when you have a few, there's so much going on here. So the first one that'll be basically the bulk of today is that Miriam, who again, this is the first time we know her name, is called a prophetess. She, just like the word that Moshe and other prophets are called, and identifies her as Aaron's sister, not as Moshe's sister, but as Aaron's sister. And then she starts to dance, and there's a famous song, I think Debbie Friedman with the women dancing with their timbrels, a really cool song. And then she starts to sing and she has a line, and then they move on. And Moshe says, all right, time to go, guys. Now, the way it reads here is as if Moshe had like this 20-minute epic operatic, song. And he's like, and now the women share your joy for God. And they're like, we love. And he's like, oh, that's enough, moving on. The rabbis do pick up on that. And I don't remember if it's in any of the texts here, but they say that essentially what Miriam did, and this isn't necessarily inappropriate, but they say that Miriam simply sang the same song. And there's a lot can be unpacked there. Was Moshe's song made up on the spot? Was it inspired by God? What is it, a song, like a format that existed that you just make a few changes? Like there's already songs that people knew and you just added a line here or there. So for Miriam to sing the same song, there's nothing inappropriate or misogynistic. Like it's just a popular song with a few extra added lines for their occasion. But regardless, the rabbis say she basically sang the same song. And that's why we didn't write the whole thing here. It would have been just, too many, we didn't need to write the lines. You know what she was singing. And others disagree, but regardless, she still has a great moment here. And she really is an incredibly important person in the Torah, and we'll see that come out later. But what we'll first do in these next couple of things is we're gonna look at that one moment about what she was doing. So Leonard, if you would take Rashi's commentary on those verses, please, with timbrels and with dances.
Righteous women in that generation were confident that God would perform miracles for them. And they accordingly had brought timbrels with them from Egypt.
So that's just the thing that you don't even think about. They were just in slavery for hundreds of years, and they have tambourines with them. Like what's going on here? So Rashi brings a midrash that suggests that they knew that they were going to be freed, and they were preparing for this celebration. And in fact, I've actually been reading, or I just read a book about World War II, and a nation which lost the war. Very much lost the war, and it's good that they lost the war. When they thought they were going to win, they were setting up stages in the streets and getting all the celebration things ready because they thought they were going to win. So it is a thing in war that when you think victory is just in sight, you do get prepared for it. And thank God, again, literally, thank God, God did save us and they were able to prepare. Where they got the tambourines, the timbrels, etc. from, I don't know, but it's just an interesting thing that we don't think about, but Rashi certainly did. And Leonard, I'll let you take this next short Rashi as well, and Miriam sang.
And Miriam sang to them. Moses sang the song to the men. He sang it, and they repeated it after him. And Miriam sang the song to the women, and they repeated it after her. Tita, the Rabbi Ishmael.
Excellent. So this is where I mentioned this text and the next one about what did she actually sing there. So it says here that she sang the same song as Moshe, and then we don't need to read the next one. This really cool source, which is a compilation of sources, Siftei Chachamim, just suggests that since she sang the exact same song, the Torah just decided to abbreviate it because you know what's going on. So now we're going to move into, well, I guess I'll ask if there are any questions just up until this point on those few short sources. Again, just an interesting insight, but the bulk of the class, again, will really be on the way that Miriam is identified here. And Samar, I'm going to unmute you to prepare for that. And again, it uses the word prophetess, neviah. And that's peculiar and that's unique in the Torah. And it seems like we haven't seen that before. And that's part of it is, not just the whole like, oh, women can't be as great. Like that's part of the conversation here about the role of women in the Torah and that they can be as great as men. But we've also never seen it before. It's really unique at this point. So why all of a sudden is she being called it? And the other thing is, what does it mean she's a prophetess? She could be a general like Devorah or a great woman or all these things. But what meaning does prophet have if Moshe has it and he talks to God and can tell the future and do all these things? But what has Miriam done to earn the title of prophetess? So Tamar, if you'll take, this is again the grandson of Rashi, Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, and he begins the discussion for us. So, and I think this is it. It doesn't go on to the next page. So please, Tamar.
Hanvia, the term Navi or Neviah is accorded to people who either are held in high esteem by their peers for their eloquence or their ability to admonish their peers.
Excellent, thank you. So the first thing Rashbam points out, which really is quite true, and you see this as you read through the books of the prophets, is prophecy doesn't just mean what Moshe did, or what Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet did, where they can do miracles and speak directly to God and tell the future. Prophets can do many different things. I was just reading a book that said one of a prophet's favorite pastimes is, telling people what to do and what they did wrong and putting history in context. And he adds here is people who are held in really great and high esteem. Now, that doesn't mean that a great rabbi would necessarily be called a prophet. There's something, to another level, but Miriam was truly a great leader of the people, and really it helped save Moshe's life. She was a great and significant person in history who clearly knew how to lead the people. And it seems probably worked with her brothers, Moshe and Aharon, to help lead the people. And her mistakes were significant and her successes were significant. And when she died, water dried up. So even God recognized how great she was. So to call her a prophetess doesn't mean she necessarily had divine miraculous powers, but it means she was a truly great person. And everyone can agree with that. And in fact, even though rabbis are going to suggest there's more going on here, I think all of them will say, oh, she absolutely was amazing. So Rita, I'm going to unmute you for this next source. And where this is the Chizkuni, Hezekiah ben Manoach from 13th century France. And he's going to add a little bit more here to the way that prophetess is used. Not so different from Rashbam, but a little more depth, please.
Miriam Hanavia, Miriam the prophetess. The word prophetess is used here to describe Miriam's extraordinary ability to use words to express her feelings. According to Rashbam, the word is also used as describing someone who preaches to people to behave morally and ethically correctly. Compare, then God told Moses that his brother Aaron would be Navi.
Neviecha.
Neviecha, which can hardly mean your prophet, as Moses outclasses him in that department.
Thank you. So he brings in the Rashbam here, which is really cool. And he says the Rashbam, basically he's adding layers onto what the Rashbam said. And the two things he really adds, the one is that somebody who speaks beautifully and eloquently and really can reach the people is, a prophet. And I think we hear that sometimes today when we see someone's words are prophetic. If they wrote a book and they say, oh, this book is prophetic, we don't necessarily mean they're a prophet and speaking to God, but their language can just reach and move the people so powerfully that there's a prophetic nature to it. So the word prophet has more of an expanded understanding here. And then the last interesting point here is Hashem refers to Aharon as Moshe's Neviecha. Now, Moshe is the greatest prophet of all. So whoever would be his prophet, who would outclass him, just doesn't exist. But if you think of a prophet as somebody who has this incredible skill set to be able to move the people and communicate with them, then of course Aharon would fit that role, even for Moshe. Because Moshe, we had a class on what was Moshe's challenge with speaking, but whatever it was, he needed Aharon's words and eloquence. And if that's one of the great skills of a prophet, then Aharon certainly was a prophet of Moshe. Now, this is, again, one of the popular understandings of what it means that Miriam was the prophetess. She was an incredible leader. And that goes without saying. And this next source here is not going to take that away from her. But this next source here is really incredible. And it's written by Ramiro Bachia, 13th century Spain. So, we're around the same time in the world in Sephardic lands. But there's a lot interesting about this piece. However, at least the way I read it, I found this piece to be more feminist and progressive than the last piece we're going to read, which is actually written by a Bible scholar who is a woman. I don't know if she's a professed feminist. I believe in many ways she is, but it's incredible that this 13th century piece is incredibly pro-women and their roles, and really goes way beyond any rabbis before and what they suggested, what it means when we say that Miriam is a prophetess. And it takes it quite literally and expands the pool and says, not only Miriam is a prophetess, and then brings in these incredible examples. So Jane and Ellis, I'm going to unmute you. And if Jane, you would like to take this text from Rabbeinu Bachya, please.
A midrashic approach, the Torah links Miriam as a prophetess to her brother Aaron rather than to her brother Moses. The Torah's message is that she demonstrated her prophetic gift while she was a sister of Aaron before Moses had been born. In fact, her prophecy concerned Moses. She predicted that her mother would give birth to the Redeemer of the Jewish people. We need
before you go on, just
sure.
An important point. There's two things that Rabbeinu Bachya is going to do here. The first is he brings in this midrash, which is mentioned a number of places here, the Talmud, that says that she was called a prophet because she literally had a prophecy. Even though it's only in a midrash, that doesn't matter. She prophesied that Moshe would be a boy and would be the redeemer of the people. But in the second half, he's going to shift to more concrete things in the text that show women's ability to connect and speak to God as much as the men. So please continue.
We need to understand why the prophetic spirit was entrusted to a woman rather than to a man. Actually, there is hardly anything surprising in this. After all, woman is as much part of the species as is man. Did not the Torah refer to both of them as Adam in Genesis 5:2? Our sages, Megillah 14, claim that Sarah was not inferior to Miriam in her prophetic qualities, seeing the Torah refers to her as Yiskeh, Genesis 11:29, which means that she saw things with her Holy Spirit. Shmot Rabbah claims that the word in Genesis, where God told Abraham to listen to all that Sarah would tell him, proves that as a prophet, Abraham was junior to Sarah. This is the view of the Midrash. The fact that the Torah itself does not mention prophecy in connection with a woman until Miriam. The reason that this is the time the matter, the reason that this is the time the matter of Miriam's prophecy was revealed is either to teach us that she possessed this gift prior to Moses' birth, or because the Torah wanted to wait with telling us this until the Shekhinah itself had been exiled. The Torah wanted to allude to the statement we have already quoted that the quality of the prophetic visions granted even to women at the bottom of the social register at the time of the crossing of the sea surpassed that of the visions granted to the great prophet Ezekiel. Hence, the Torah saw fit to record that not only Miriam, but all her colleagues broke out in song and dance praising the Lord. The Midrash means that Miriam and her colleagues broke out in that song spontaneously. They did not paraphrase the words Moses had composed, but composed their own.
So I want to pause there for a moment just to point that out, because earlier we had seen Rashi suggested from a Midrash that the Torah only include a short word there because she basically just sang the same thing as Moshe. Rabbeinu Bachya is disagreeing and saying, no, they sang their own song and it was a prophetic divine moment. And Miriam, who was probably not the bottom of the social ladder, but certainly, and this is the tension here, despite how much Rabbeinu Bachya is showing that women are great, obviously, practically speaking in society, women often had a lower role. But he's saying despite that, despite the fact that they were, so far down on the social totem pole, their ability to have prophecy was far greater than even the later prophets of Yechezkel, etc., like that. So again, that tension exists here. Rabbeinu Bachya it's incredible what he's writing here, but we can't forget that women, even though they could be prophets, they still were not accorded the same respect and status as men. But I still want to appreciate how beautiful it is what he's saying here and how progressive and unique it is. Nope, they can't forget what was said earlier. They came up with their own song, and Sarah was an even greater prophet than Abraham. That's quite a statement. Please continue, Jane.
There are numerous other fundamental aspects of Torah which have been taught to the people by women.
And in this, the ellipses that I put there, he just brings 6 or 7 examples of, mitzvot that are either shared by women or come up by women. It was just like a long and lengthy list, but it's really cool. Like, it's in the text. It's not even midrash. There are major things that women contributed to the Torah. And again, it should be more, and it should just be typical that it happens, but it's still something significant. Please.
Our sages in Megillah 14 have taught that there were a total of 7 women prophetesses: Sarah, Miriam, Hannah, Devorah, Huldah, Abigail, and Esther. The number corresponds to the 7 attributes which are of a passive nature. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut.
Which those in Kabbalah are the sphero, the different, the thing that kind of looks like a person, the circle head and the arms and everything like that. These are the aspects, or the way that God interacts in the world, when God is righteous, when God is beautiful, when God is miracles, etc. But again, this piece is just so beautiful in the 13th century, where he recognizes the greatness of women. And again, he's not making it up from scratch. He has a Talmud, he has, from Megillah, that the rabbis did recognize that women had a capacity for prophecy. Now, that is, if that was the one point today, is that when the Torah calls Miriam a prophetess, it means that the way that she connected with the people, her status and position, her ability to bring down God's goodness and greatness and message was just as great as any man. Moshe may have been greater, whatever that means, simply because he's Moshe, not because he's a man. He's just the greatest prophet. It has nothing to do with men and women. But Miriam was absolutely a great prophetess, hands down, end of story. But the other takeaway for this is, as I said, we can't ignore the fact that despite this beautiful piece, that the role of women in really all religions, or all that I'm familiar with, has just not been, they've not had as much access. Their contributions have either been downplayed. I was reading some other texts that were more critical of this, that were saying there should have been so much more said of Miriam here. And perhaps that's true. And that's the tension that we have to live with. However, the flip side, and what I want to end with for this class, is that there are women scholars today, or scholars who happen to be women of Torah, and there are many of them. Some of the greatest ones that I'm familiar with, Yael Ziegler has written some incredible works in English, and one of them right here that I'm sharing, Aviva Zornberg, she's a contemporary Bible scholar. She lives, I think, in Israel, and she's written a number of works and given a lot of classes. And she's going to speak about this whole thing about Miriam being a prophetess. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a summary. It adds a little bit of nuance. But one of the reasons I'm bringing it here, besides the fact that in and of itself, regardless of who wrote it, this is a good piece of Torah. But I think it's very important in our day and age because women can and should have access today, and that's a possibility, to go out of our way to make sure that we're learning Torah from women as much as men. And practically speaking, that's a challenge. If you go into a Judaica store and you say, I want to buy 10 books by women on Torah, there's certainly that many published, but a lot of Judaica stores are not going to carry it. And the classical commentaries that in some ways have really laid the foundation were not written by women. So the content out there, there's not as much as there is by men. And certainly in certain Orthodox worlds, women are not doing this. So it's really important when we do have a scholar who happens to be a woman to make sure that we learn her Torah too, not only because it's good regardless of her gender, but it also can allow us to get some different insights that men are going to miss from the text. And it doesn't matter if, it's feminist or not. It's not the point. It's humanist. And, everybody's a human being, and we all need to bring our full selves when we learn Torah. So with that in mind, and celebrating Miriam on the Shabbat Shirah, which is really a Shabbat all about women and the incredible songs and the incredible deeds that they did for our people, I'll end with this final piece from Aviva Zornberg, who, if you have not heard of her, again, she has at least 4 incredible works. And I think before I start, yes, you just have to click on your side, Gloria.
Yeah,
please.
She spoke at Lake Park Synagogue about maybe 20 years ago.
That's amazing. So I'm preaching to the choir here on this one. I'll just look for a head nod. Is she awesome?
Yes, absolutely.
So I've only seen her through YouTube videos and reading her works. And I think I missed her one Shabbat when I was in New York. But all of you can then even appreciate her more than I can. So God willing, with the pandemic, in fact, I think this last year, had there not been a pandemic, we are actually discussing several scholars who are women to actually bring out. So God willing, this coming year, we'll be able to do so. And actually, I'm literally reading a book on Esther right now, how appropriate for Purim coming up in a month. And the author, Erica Brown, she's awesome and so well read and incredible. Okay, so thank you for sharing.
She also spoke at Lake Park Synagogue. We had a Shabbaton once when Rabbi Fine was in our shul, a rabbi.
Yeah.
She came in the last year of his officiating here, and she spent a weekend with us.
You know what? Let's just bring her back. It's clearly she's already a friend of the congregation. So knowing that she has already been here before, I share that with that as well. So she says on this piece, at the end of the song, Miriam, the prophetess, as the Torah emphasizes, leads the women responsively in another song. She is indeed named for the first time, as I had said earlier, as she sings and dances. Though she figured prominently in chapter 2, bringing the infant Moshe to his mother to nurse, she has remained anonymous, simply Moses' sister until now. Essentially, she plays the role of Moses among the men. She sings and the women answer. The clearest contrast to the men is that the women play musical instruments, drums, and dance during their song. Also that the opening words of their song, Sing to God, are not identical with those of the men's song, Let Me Sing to God, the Az, in the Hebrew that Moshe used. All the difference of what the women bring to their song is crystallized in these drums, expressive of faith in what is not yet. They prepare for miracles, almost a contradiction in terms. They are set for wonder, carrying the instruments of song with them through the corridors of fear. The fact that Miriam, the prophetess, leads the women reminds us of her prophetic function in the dark days of Egypt. But more poignantly, her very name is connected with the bitterness, Marah, Maryam, bitter waters of those days. The Midrash links her, unlike the other redeemers, Moshe and Aaron, back to the beginnings of Egyptian persecution. She has been there. She has been the light that has driven her people forward. And now that they've all gone through this incredible moment passing through the Sea of Reeds, Moshe is celebrating what was. Miriam is already thinking to what will be. So it continues, I had no peace from Eov, from the first decree that Paro laid upon me, and they embittered Vayimareru their lives, but then God raised up a redeemer for me, that is Miriam, named for bitterness, which is from a Midrash. The very origin of the story of the Exodus is signified by bitterness. Still nameless, and with this bitterness of her people suffering in her veins, Miriam rises as a prophetess. She redeems it, but not in a magical sense. She does not make it disappear. Rather, she redeems it. She rethinks it. She sings it into a different place. Forever her name will speak of it. Her song will arise from it, anticipating the future without denying present and past. Our past has been prophets, incredible men, but almost entirely men. And our future needs to be men and women prophesying together. And Miriam was thinking forward to her people, the miracles that will come, the miracles that we will bring through our actions. That was the greatness of Miriam, and that was the greatness of Devorah, the greatness of Yael, and so too the greatness of Aviva Zornberg is always appreciating the past. What can we learn from it? But what will it tell us about what our future will